Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. I'm TCaptainX. The new Warzone Black Ops 6 integration is here, and with that, all of our settings have changed, and the default settings are very, very bad in this game, to say the least. So I'm gonna get you guys covered with some settings to instantly improve your aim and movement, and if you're a PC player using a controller, some extra stuff to make things even better for you. All right, so starting with our button layout. With Omni movement, having the right button layout is incredibly important. Now, the default button layout is really not very good, and let me explain why. If I want to jump, I have to take my thumb off of the analog stick. If I want to slide, I have to take my thumb off the analog stick. And this means I can't jump, slide, and aim all at the same time, meaning I can't use Omni movement and aim at the same time. So if you're going to stay on the default button layout, you can do something called playing claw. And this is actually how we hold our controller. If you look at my hand cam, if I curl my right index finger down so that I can hit all of these buttons here, I can keep my thumb on the analog stick and then jump, slide, and do all that stuff. Now, for me personally, playing claw, it's just too awkward and I can't do it. But there are a lot of people out there that can. Some of the best players in the world play on claw. If you're like me and you can't do that, the next recommendation I would have is change your button layout to bumper jumper tactical. This one's a little bit awkward to learn and get used to, but it's more natural when you hold the controller. So this makes R3, or pressing it on the right stick, our slide button so that we can still aim and slide. And it makes L1 or left bumper our jump. That, for a lot of people, is very awkward to learn that, but once you kind of just get the muscle memory down, we can aim, jump, and slide all at the same time. Now, if you're like, that's gross, I'm not trying to do that. Something else we can do, which I think I've heard a lot of people recommend this to me actually, is that just go back to default and we're gonna change some custom stuff here. So for our jump, we're gonna make this L3. And then for our slide, we are going to make this R3. And this, now we can slide with R3 like in bumper jumper, and then we can press the left stick or L3 to jump. So again, we can jump, aim, slide all at the same time without having to take our thumb off the analog stick. Now, I don't play with either of those. I play on default, and my controller actually has extra buttons on the back. So this has 4 paddles on the back. My bottom right is my slide and my bottom left is my jump. So slide canceling is very easily like that. And then I can curl my fingers up to switch weapons, triangle on top right, or reload on square on the top left. Now, you don't need a controller that has 4 paddles, but having 2 paddles is probably the most ideal situation and easiest to learn to have fluid movement. Another cool thing about this controller is I have what's called digital tap triggers. So this is me tapping. It's basically like a mouse click. And with this, I can toggle this to go to a full trigger pull on both sides if I want to, in case I wanted to play like a racing game or something like that maybe. And then I can very easily go back, bam, I'm back to those mouse click triggers. What this does is it makes shooting semi-auto guns like pistols much, much easier and faster to do. Also, this controller has different analog stick height. So as you can see, my right analog stick is actually taller than my left. And what this does is it gives me more surface area to aim with. And it's like playing on a slower sensitivity, but you can still go fast if you want because you have a longer lever and more area to control your aim. Now, if you don't have a custom controller, you can also buy what's called a Control Freak. And this is a little thing that pops on top of your analog stick, which makes it taller. I'd recommend doing this on your right stick. There's smaller ones than this if this feels too tall for you, but this extra height on your analog stick makes it so much easier to kind of line up those long and precise shots. The cold, honest truth is if you want your best chance at succeeding, if you're trying to get better and be competitive, upgrading to a custom controller is the best thing you can do. It's probably your most worthwhile investment into anything to your gaming setup. I use an aim controller from aimcontrollers.com. I've been using this controller for I think coming on 3 years now. I've been using these controllers. They do ship internationally, but if you are in the US, you would click on the US. They've got PS5, PS4, and Xbox controllers. And I'm gonna really quick show you guys how to build the one that I have. So it's a custom PS5 controller. So every PS5 aim controller comes with the 4 paddles, the digital tap triggers that come on and off for L2, R2, and then also snap panels. So the cool thing about snap panels is I can actually pop off of the faceplate on this controller and I can put a new design on if I want. So as you can see, there's lots of different, graphical things that we can change. I do have my own custom design if you want to do that. But when it comes to kind of the important stuff, digital buttons is going to make your D-pad and then your action buttons a mouse click feel. These aren't incredibly necessary. They are nice, but if you're trying to save money, I wouldn't necessarily worry about these. Now, Hall effect sticks is another very, very interesting thing that we have got to talk about. A little bit more pricey of an option. It's a $65 add-on. However, these will basically guarantee you to never have stick drift because you can reset these because they use magnets instead of an actual physical contact. Now, one kind of warning with the Hall effects is that the Hall effect sensitivity tends to be a little bit faster than the default ones. So most people say they have to turn their sense down by about 1, maybe 2 points for it to kind of feel 1-to-1. And then there's usually like a small adjustment period of just getting the feel of that. I personally do not use them, but I've never really had stick drift issues with my controller. Now, I'm not guaranteeing you will have absolutely zero stick drift ever on an AIM controller, but in terms of quality, these are officially licensed Sony controllers. They are legit. As long as you take care of your controller, you should be okay. Now, moving on to the aim sticks, this is how we get those custom heights. Just pick any color for the base, whichever, it doesn't really matter what you do. For the left stick, I play with a PS Black small, and then for the right stick, I play with a PS high. Now, the cool thing is when you select these, as long as you select different heights here, they're gonna actually give you all of the heights, and you can swap those heights on and off in case you don't like them. The next thing I'd recommend adding on is going to be the grip on the back. This gives it a rubberized feel. That way, when your hands start to get sweaty when you're playing for a while, the controller stays where it needs to do. Another optional thing is smart bumpers. This makes your L1, R1, that digital tap click as well. This is not super duper necessary because the L1, R1 is already pretty fast, but if you've got the money to spend, it's not a horrible investment by any means. And then I normally do spend the extra $8 to take the vibration motors out of the controller because it makes the controller a lot lighter. But if you like that, totally just leave them in. Now, I totally understand that the price looks pretty pricey here, but if we put in my code TCaptainX, it is going to knock $69, hey, great number, off the price. I totally understand it is still a bit of a pricey controller. However, these do come with a lifetime warranty on any of those modded parts. So if any of those custom modded parts were to break, you just email AIM, say, hey, it broke. All you have to do is pay the shipping the controller back to them. They fix it and they send it right back to you. All right, now we're gonna talk about our sensitivity here. So number one, if you've been playing COD before, whatever your sense was in the last game, you can basically leave it the same and it should be the same. Some people have tried to say that the sensitivity feels slower in this game and that they've actually increased their previous one by 1. I don't feel that to be true whatsoever. So mine is still 7.7 and I've been 7.7 for quite some time now. Now, if you have no idea, a general rule of thumb is anywhere between 6.6 and 8.8 is a really good place to start. Probably 95% of the best Warzone players play between those sensitivities. I play at 7.7 personally. There are a handful of players that play a little bit faster than that in the realm of maybe 9 to 12, and very few that play even higher than that. A lot of people like to crank their sense up to 2020 and they think they have amazing movement. And yes, you can do some really cool things on that high of a sense, but it is not giving you an advantage. Ultimately, your aim is going to suffer on this high of a sensitivity. So if you look at all of the best players, I'd recommend doing what they do and stick between somewhere in 6 and 8. Now, if you're clueless, one thing you can do is you can pick a point like this little door here on this gun, and you basically would move your aim and you try to flick and stop your aim on it. If you continuously flick way short, you might need to turn your sense up. If you continuously flick way past it, you might need to turn your sensitivity down. The other thing I'd say is you're going to change your sense is you need to stick with your sensitivity for ideally a few days to weeks, and you cannot just keep changing your sense in other settings every single day. You have to give yourself some time to get used to it. Now, before we finish these controller settings, we're actually going to jump over to the aiming tab here. They have the settings laid out in a really, really weird manner, so I apologize, and hit the show more under sensitivity multiplier because we need to talk about our ADS sensitivity multiplier. So what this is if you leave it at 1, that would mean that when we aim our gun, our sense when we aim versus hip fire will be the same. Now I have mine turned down to 0.85, and that means my aiming sense is 85% of what my hip fire sense is. And turning this down slightly just allows me to be a little bit more accurate. So the rule of thumb is very simple. If you feel like you really struggle lining up those long, precise shots, like when you're sniping or at long ranges, start to turn this number down. I think probably about 0.7 is as low I'd recommend anyone go. But if you're on the other end and you're like, I can't keep up with people, especially in close range, then keep this number closer to 1. But I would not recommend that you go over 1. Stay between that 0.7 to 1. And that's why I like to sit in the middle at 0.85. From here, if we go to the aiming advanced settings, there are 2 very important settings in here. The most important is the aim response curve type. Now the default is standard and that's okay, but probably 95% of the top Warzone players are playing on dynamic. The simple reason for this is 2 things. It gives us the advantage of in close ranges, when we max the stick out, we can spin around very quickly. But when we're trying to line shots up and be very precise and hit, precise flicks and track people from far away, it slows down to allow us to be more precise. There are a lot of people that really gas up and love linear. You can try it, but again, if you look at 95% of the top players, they're all on dynamic, and that's generally because it's probably the most optimal setting. Another important one here is going to be our ADS sense transition timing. The general rule of thumb is instant or gradual are fine, just don't do after zoom. What this does is if you're on instant, the second I start to ADS, the second I press L2, if I have an ADS sense multiplier other than 1, that effect will start to apply. I think instant is probably most ideal for muscle memory. That way, the second you hit L2, and as you're starting to zoom in during that process, your sense is automatically going to be applied to your ADS sense multiplier. Now, just finishing up the aiming tab really quick here. For the sensitivity multipliers here, this is all personal preference if you want to change some of these other ones, but generally you can leave it on 1. Look inversion if you want to flip your up and down. Aiming advanced settings, we already covered the rest of these. Some people like to play with custom sense per zoom, and different specific zoom optics can have different sensitivities. I like to leave mine at 1, but there are some people that do prefer to mess around with that. Definitely leave our aim assist on, guys. Absolutely do not turn this off. And then for the motion sensor, we're not going to cover this because that's like the gyro aiming where you move your controller around. All right, we're going to tab back to the controller tab. I apologize that things are laid out in just a weird way. Make sure both of these presets are left off. Bumper ping, generally I recommend leaving this off. This flips your ping to, I think normally your L1, but if you're playing on one of those different button layouts, you may not want to do this. And then the L1, R1. So if you're on a standard controller and you're not using an aim controller like mine, it is a good idea to flip this on, because now we can aim and shoot with L1, R1, which is just a button instead of a full trigger, which makes shooting those semi-auto guns a little bit easier compared to having, but not as good as if you have those digital tap triggers like I do. Controller vibration, recommend leaving this off, but maybe turn on for campaign if you want that more immersion. Now, dead zones. Dead zones are extremely important because the default settings are horrible in this game. They are like really, really high minimum dead zones, and that will make your movement and aim feel horrible. So here's the rule of thumb. For our minimums, our left min and our right stick min, we want to turn these down as low as we can go to where we don't get stick drift. We actually can do a little test here where if you turn this on, it will start to say if you have input. Now, if you turn it on, if you're not touching your controller, and all of these numbers stay at 0, those percentages, then you're good. That means you don't really have much stick drift. But if I turn my right minimum all the way down to 0 and I turn it on, actually I still don't have stick drift. So we're doing okay there. So that's just a crude way to test for stick drift. Something else you can do though is you can just sit here in the game and don't touch your controller. If your guy is moving like forward, actually, that means you have left stick drift. And if your guy is aiming, is starting to look a different direction, you would have stick drift in the right one. And the way we fix that is simple. We just simply are going to increase these numbers until that drift will stop. Now, if you start getting above, like much above 5, especially above 10, you might want to look to invest into a new controller because we really need this number down as low as we can go, ideally between like 2 and 5. Now, some people like to go all the way to 0. I personally don't like to do that, and I've always played at 2, but anywhere between 2 and 5 is perfectly fine. Now, for our maximums, it is incredibly important that we turn this left stick maximum down a little bit from 100. Because what this does when we turn it down is it allows us to get into our tack sprint a little bit quicker, and it makes our movement just that much more fluid, and it will also prevent our dead slides from happening, because sometimes if we don't get to that tack sprint all the way, it will slow things down. Now, this game still has its issues where if you're like too fast about changing directions, your guy wants to be slow. So we do have to be a little bit more purposeful with our movements this year, but make sure we turn that maximum down anywhere between Like, I would say 60 to 70 is fine. I chose 69 because why not? We also can change the dead zones of our triggers, but for me, this does not matter because again, I've got those digital tap mouse click triggers. All right, now we're going over to the movement tab and starting with sprint assist. Now, sprint assist is what used to be our like auto tac sprint or auto sprint in old Call of Duties. They've changed the wording here. So the default is off, and I don't recommend off because when we go off, it's much harder for us to get into our sprint. We have to then press our L3 or our left stick. If you want the most fluid and easy movement where you don't have to think about it, tactical sprint assist is going to be basically what auto tac sprint used to be. And this means as soon as we press our left stick, we are instantly in our fastest tactical sprint. But you need to also hit show more and turn this a delay all the way to 0. The default is like really high. And what this does is it delays until you get into that that faster tac sprint, and it just makes your movement feel super clunky and bad. So make sure that is all the way down. Leave these assists on for both of these. Now you can go to just on, and then you have to press L3 once to get to your tac sprint, but I like to go all the way to tactical sprint assist. For all of the mantle assist, my rule of thumb is I leave this off. This can make mantling, especially through Windows, a little bit awkward because you actually have to line up and press and jump through. Whereas if you leave it on, if you just run through it, your guy will auto mantle in, and whereas sometimes he won't if you kind of miss the window here. So if you hate that, I would probably say do low mantle assist, but low mantle assist will sometimes make you automatically like accidentally climb over things that you didn't want to climb over. So you just have to be careful if you leave any of those on. So again, I turn those off. There's even additional ones in here you can adjust. I would recommend you turn this angle down to tight if you're going to have this on in any capacity. Crouch assist, I leave this off. Crouch assist, if you have a thing that you can't walk through, but you could crouch under, it will auto crouch you. Not a big deal, but I like to leave it off personally. You can also have it come on only when you're tac sprinting if you want. Corner slicing, I've left off. Corner slicing is that thing when you get up to a corner, your guy bends around the corner. There's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't give you an advantage. When we do this angle, the enemy POV, your guy doesn't like do anything differently. So me personally, I think I would rather just leave it off so I don't have to worry with like that disorientation of leaning. Slide dive behavior, very, very important this year because diving is important because we can actually shoot while diving and we can dive backwards and sideways and all that. So we want to be able to dive this year. What hybrid does is when we when we press in on L3 and then we hit slide, we will dive. But if I'm not pressing in on L3 or my left stick and I hit slide, I slide. So if you're going to play with hybrid, it's very important that you want to play with tactical sprint assist on. So if you're not going to do that, I don't recommend hybrid. Now, if you're just like TCap, I cannot get used to hybrid. Here's what I recommend. Go to tap to slide and then hit show more and turn the delay down to short. Even with this button on short, we will still have a slight delay from the moment we hit slide until our character actually slides. But it's not as bad if we turn it down. The reason I don't like tap to slide is again because there's a delay in our slide cancel slightly compared to if it's on hybrid. There is no delay. The second you press either of those buttons, you're going to slide or you're going to dive. Sprint restore, leave this on. This will automatically get you back to your sprint once you regain and refresh it. Slide maintain sprint, leave this on as this makes slide canceling a lot easier and you will automatically stand back up after a slide as long as you are sprinting forward. Turn your parachute behavior off unless you always splat. You can leave that on if you want to. Mantle cancel reload, make sure this is off because this will accidentally cancel your reload a bunch. Movement advanced settings, when we go in here, the most important one here is probably going to be the tactical sprint activation if you are not using tactical sprint assist. So if you have your tactical sprint assist to on or just sprint, what I'd recommend is put this to single tap run because what this does is if that setting is off, so if we go back and if I turn this off, I only have to press my left stick or L3 once, and then I instantly get to my tac sprint. This is much easier if you don't like auto tac sprint to get in and out and still have good movement. The problem is you're gonna have to spam your L3 and you will likely end up having, you're gonna wear down your left stick probably. And then real quick in the vehicle advanced settings here, I have not changed any of these. So these are all default. And finally going over to the combat tab here. So ADS behavior, leave that on hold. Weapon mount activations is just how you mount. So ADS plus your melee button. is usually the best one. Just make sure you don't do only ADS because you will accidentally mount all the time. Dedicated melee activation, definitely want this on hold melee and not cycle. If we hold our melee button, you will actually bring your knife out, and this will allow you to just get around the map a lot faster. It's good for movement speed, and then you can hit weapon switch to get back. I've actually swapped my execution with my body shield. So holding melee, and when I go behind someone, we'll put them in that cool body shield mechanic where you can drag him around and still shoot people. If you leave this on the normal prioritize finishing move, then you have to double tap to body shield them. Armor plate, make sure this is on apply all. C4, kind of up to you, but normally all at once is what most people prefer. Equipment behavior, I like hold. What toggle does is when you hit it, it will hold it. And then when I hit it again, it will throw it. Whereas hold is basically the opposite. It will, you hold it and you let go to throw it. Manual fire behavior, you're gonna want this on press. However, some burst and semi-auto guns, if you put this to hold, you can just hold it down and it will automatically shoot the gun, even though it's a semi-automatic or a burst. But usually this is much slower than what you could do if you have a fast trigger finger. But if you're more casual, you have a really bad trigger finger, maybe changing this to hold is what you'd want to do. In the combat advanced settings tab here, probably the most important setting here is actually going to be our interact reload behavior. And it looks like mine got reset for some reason. So for Warzone, you're going to want to make sure this is on prioritize interact. If you play multiplayer, tap to reload is probably fine, or prioritize reload. But what prioritize interact does is it makes it so that interacting with something like a door is you just tap it and it will instantly open. This also makes looting 10 times faster and easier because you can just tap to open boxes and loot stuff. But if you're like surrounded by loot at your feet, it's very, or like I have a door here, for example, I need to hold square in order to reload the gun. Also, make sure your sprint cancels reload is off, because if you leave this on, this will mess up, and as soon as you start moving, it will completely screw up your reload, and it just makes things goofy. Akimbo behavior, if you're running a kimbo gun, so like the dual guns, you can change this to paired so that you only have to press your shoot button on your normal one, and you don't have to spam L2 and R2. It just makes it a little bit easier, I think, to shoot akimbos, but that is personal preference. I like to leave my depleted ammo weapon switch off so that I have to manually switch my gun when I run out of ammo. That is, again, personal preference though. Now we're gonna go to the graphics tab. I'm not gonna cover my graphic settings in this video because that will be a dedicated separate video, or otherwise this video would be way incredibly too long. But go to our view tab because we need to talk about field of view. The general rule of thumb for field of view is that for Warzone, anywhere between 105 to 120 is probably most ideal, maybe as low as 100. So the default, I think, is only 90. So turn this up to about 100, 105 if you're not used to this. This will widen our field of view. Now, I play on the absolute maximum of 120. And if you watch my background, you see the camera gets wider. The benefit of this is that I can see enemies farther from left to right. The downside to this, though, is that enemies appear farther away from me because my field of view is zoomed back. However, what this benefit also does is because I'm more zoomed back, it actually will decrease the amount of visual recoil of the gun. It doesn't actually change the recoil, but it appears like there's less recoil, because if I crank this way down here, I'm going to show you how much worse this looks. Now look at the recoil. See, it seems like I'm getting more recoil, but the recoil pattern is identical. Now the lower FOV also makes things look way bigger and closer to you, but again, now I can't see to my side at all, and it's very easy for someone to come up behind me, and I'm just not going to see them in my peripheral vision. So again, that's why usually at least in the ballpark of like 100 is good, but the wider you go, the more you can see, and it's going to really help in those close range fights especially. So I like to play at 120, but play around between 105 and 120. And then for our ADS field of view, affected is what like 99% of people is what you're gonna want. What independent does, some people like this, what independent does is when we zoom, it will zoom our gun way more in, like you're playing on a lower FOV. It's especially most noticeable when you're having like a 1x optic. It's not as noticeable on a 3x, but generally you're gonna wanna keep this one on affected. And as you can see on affected, the zoom is way less when I ADS. Weapon field of view, recommend this to wide. Again, just kind of pushes that weapon away from you so you can see a little bit more around you. Third person, we don't do third person, but I'd recommend turning it up in case you do, like in zombies or something. Vehicle field of view, also recommend wide. And then for our camera settings, make sure these blurs are off and turn the movements down to as low as they go. If you want, you can also invert your flashbangs so that flashbangs pop up as black instead of white. Now, I'm not going to go too in depth here on audio because it is a little bit early and things are likely going to change. One thing I have found, though, is that you do not want to turn this enhanced headphone mode on. Turning it on in Warzone sucks. In multiplayer, it's okay. So definitely leave that off. I've been playing around with audio mixes. I'm sorry. Headphone bass boost, it's okay. I am not currently playing with the custom Art is War audio because it just sounds weird in this game and I'm not a big fan of it, unfortunately. And then when you go into the other volumes here, definitely recommend turning like your musics down. You can probably turn your dialogue down some as well, but leave your effects all the way up because effects is what gunfire and footsteps and stuff is. Now in the interface tab, the main thing that I want to cover here really quickly is make sure our minimap is set to square. And then go down to our crosshair, and I like to have my crosshair to largest. It makes that center dot bigger so I can visualize my centering a little bit better. And then I really like to change this color. You can change it to whatever you want. I like green. I think like a pink or purple would be a really good color. You want to make sure it's something that stands out from the environment, but just whatever helps you visualize and see where your center dot is gonna work for you. Okay, now let's talk about how to overclock our controller. If you're on console, I'm sorry, you can't do this. You have to be on PC in order for this to work. What this is it is going to make the controller be as fast and responsive as possible. Technically, we're actually overclocking the USB port to be a faster refresh rate, essentially is how you can think of how it works. So this is a program called HID USB that you need to download. I will leave a link to it in the description. Once you do this, make sure our controller is plugged in. You cannot do this through Bluetooth, and you never really should play with your controller on Bluetooth on PC because that is always going to be slower compared to just directly plugging it into your PC. If you're on console, Bluetooth tends to be just fine though because just they're set up a little bit differently to work that way. Change the devices to all, and we're gonna look for something that is gonna be named something like controller. It'll probably actually say USB audio device because most controllers nowadays can actually play audio. So mine says DualSense wireless controller. If you're on Xbox, it might say a little bit something else. I have heard some people on Xbox have trouble with this. So you might need to look up like a specific video if you're on Xbox, if you're having issues finding yours. And then once we're here, we are going to click on it here and we are going to put filter on device. You're gonna hit install service. It's going to say yes. We then need to unplug the controller. It's going to disappear. We're going to plug it back in and then it should pop back up. And when it does that, it now says yes. And the interval has changed to 4. Now for the rate, we're going to change from default all the way to 8,000. If you're on a PS4 controller, you might not have 8,000. It might only go up to 1,000. So just go to whatever the fastest one is. Hit install again, unplug it and plug it back in. And then this time when it does this, it should come up and now it's going to say filter yes, rate 8,000 and interval 1. At this point, you are good to go. You can close the program and it should always come up like this. You shouldn't have to redo this unless you were to move the USB port of where it's plugged into your computer. So just leave that cord in there and don't mess with it. Now, one final thing you can do if you want to just make sure your controller is overclocked is you can install something known as DS4 Windows. Now, I want to throw a disclaimer right here. DS4 supposedly can be used in ways to give you an unfair advantage. I know people use it for macros, which is technically considered cheating per Activision. But DS4 Windows, what's nice about it is it will confirm whether or not your controller is overclocked. So if you just go into your whatever your profile is and you double click on it here, it'll say your input delay. My input delay says 0. If it says something other than 0, or if it's something between like 1 and 5, you're fine. But if it's like 100 or 100 plus, you didn't do your overclocking correctly. Now, again, I have not changed any of my settings, so this is literally all default. The only thing I did change was I changed my light bar to be green, but otherwise it's all default. All right, guys, that is going to wrap things up. Again, if you're interested in one of those aim controllers, make sure you use code at TCaptainX to save you a bunch of money. By the way, come check out a stream here on YouTube or on Twitch. We're streaming on both now. I will have plenty of other settings videos, best loadouts, tips to get better, all that coming very soon. So stay tuned for that.